The Wilsonian grand strategy. Just as Hamiltonians develop a set of basic ideals about how to define and defend the national interests, Wilsonians through the American history have worked from a basic set of ideas about American foreign policy. And while the Wilsonian foreign policy concepts contain much of the realists find it hard to swallow, the core strategic idea of the Wilsonian community are neither impractical nor as contradictory as their critics often allege. Their logic is powerful. The Wilsonian approach to the national security has much to recommend it, and the Wilsonian element in our foreign policy has made substantial contributions to the growth of the nation's power. The first principle of the Wilsonian foreign policy is that democracies make better and more reliable partners than monarchies and tyrannies. Far from naive, this perspective rests on a sophisticated understanding of political dynamics. Non-representative governments are unreliable partners for several reasons. We could start by citing the royal caprice. In 1756, Louis XV was rightly believed to have gone to war with Frederick the Great to avenge himself on a series of insults that the Prussian monarch permitted himself at the expense of the French kings, Mencha and Tranche. To this added secession politics. And rivalry in England, the Prince of Wales was almost always at political odds with the king. A power whose policy can change with a death or a marriage is hardly the most reliable of friends. Again, the Frederick the Great career is instructive. His throne was saved at the hour of defeat when the Russian Tsarina Elizabeth was replaced by her weak and Prussian-file heir Peter. This was the miracle of the House Brandenburg that Joseph Goebbels thought of when he heard of Franklin Roosevelt's death and rushed excitedly to tell the Fuhrer the news. But as Hitler and Goebbels discovered, democratic governments are less prone to rapid reversal than are autocratic systems. This is only the surface of the argument. Non-representative politics are unstable simply because their rulers can be erratic. They are unstable precisely because public opinion is imperfectly reflected in their government. Government can adopt and pursue policies that have no backing in society. Those policies can last until the government falls in chaos and confusion to be replaced. But by a regime that lurches equally and certainly in other unsuitable direction, there's nothing abstract about this argument. The monarchs of Europe were constantly wobbling on their thrones in the 19th century. When revolutionaries didn't bring them down, assassins shot them down. Policies in democratic countries are less likely to diverge from what is politically popular, and when democratic governments fall, there's a less danger of an overshoot in the other direction. Democratic policies are pulled towards the center and towards a rational concept of interest. Argue with Sionians. That makes them more predictable and more likely to keep promises once made. Wilsonians think of monarchical, oligarchic, and tyrannical states as resembling pyramids balanced on their noses. Democracies are like pyramids standing on their bases. The first kind are much more likely to move violently and massively in an unpredictable way. In particular, democracy guards against one of the most dangerous forms of misrepresentation and misgovernments, the, the domination of the state by a military elite. Such military states may and frequently do prefer war to peace. War consolidates military authority and ensures military control over resources. It is only civilians who benefit from the peace, and only democracy, said Wilsonians, ensure that millions who seek peace can control the thousands who want war. To put it in a nutshell, tyrants give power to generals. Democracy give it to moms. Furthermore, over time, democracy are likely to move towards an increasing degree of moral and political agreement. Massless societies are more like other than societies directed by individuals or small classes. This homogeneity leads to increasing degree of agreement over the proper constitution and rules of international society. Democracies are more likely to agree than aristocratic or monarchical states. Democracies are more reliable because they tend to prosper. Successful capitalism depends on the rule of law, and democratic governments, more than any others, are likely over time to develop fair and effective legal systems. At the same time, because voters reward politicians whose policy leads to economic growth and punish those who deem responsible for a recession, democratic states over time can be expected to move increasingly towards an effective economic policy. Finally, these advantages tend to increase over time as democracies grow more stable and more part of an order. Wilsonians look with some justice to the evolution of the Atlantic community in the 20th century as a vindication of these theories. War among these societies were commonplace before they became democracy. Now, war among them is almost unthinkable, and all they have grown very rich. As a corollary to their support of democracy around the world, Wilsonians again, under missionary influence, became determined opponents of colonialism. The British Raj was evidently not democratic. The less enlightened rule of other colonial empires was even less tolerable. Wilsonian opinion, which had flirted briefly with the imperialist options as a turn of the 20th century, soon joined the chorus calling for the United States to give up its own colonies. Wilsonian beliefs lead to the principle that the support of democracy abroad is not a moral duty for the United States, but a practical imperative as well. This belief first appeared in American politics at the time of the French Revolution, and it reappeared with every great European revolutionary movement of the 19th century. What we now call Wilsonian voices called for intervention in Latin American, Greek, Polish, Hungarian, and the Cuban Wars for Independence. In 1848 and 49, the Navy went so far to pick up Republican refugees after the collapse of the Roman Republic. Wilsonians supported American intervention in Hawaiian politics as the kingdom slowly died, but Wilsonians were unable to trigger American armed intervention in a foreign war for independence until the intervention in Cuba in 1898. In the 20th century, growing American power gave more scope for Wilsonian interventions, and American forces engaged in democratic and humanitarian intervention with increasing regularity. An important factor in the growth of the Wilsonian determination to spread democracy was startling success in American post-World War II policy in Germany, Italy, and Japan. Although all these countries had tried parliamentary system in the past, none of these former axis power had ever known real stability under democratic rule. The experiments in democratic governments that began after World War II started under very unfavorable circumstances. All these countries have been devastated by the war. Italy was divided between an energetic and militant communist party and a somewhat obstructionist Christian right. Initially, very few politicians in Japan sincerely supported the American democratic experiment. In Germany, where most historians blame the collapse of the Weimar Republic on the consequences of the harsh Treaty of Versailles, the new democracy began life under more adverse conditions than those of the Weimar Germany. Lost vastly more territory in 1945 than in 1919. Its economy was far more bitterly disrupted, and its entire social order had been twisted and distorted by 12 years of Nazi rule. Yet, in all three cases, democratic governments put down the roots, and all three countries became reliable American allies during the Cold War and after. These were hard cases. If democracy could take root in what had been in Nazi Germany, it could surely flourish anywhere. The most sustained intervention for democracy involving methods first that characterized the missionary activity in the 19th century also increased and accelerated in the 20th. Organizations such as Radio Free Europe and the Voice of America in the Cold War and the National Endowment for Democracy supported nonviolent efforts to spread democratic ideas and solidify democratic policies abroad. The vast network of non-governmental pro-democracy organizations continues and asks for and receives consular and diplomatic support from the United States and many places around the world, much as the missionaries did. The work of transforming the world on democratic lines goes on. After the promotion of democracy, the next object of the Wilsonian strategic thought is the prevention of war. Always brutal and destructive war under modern conditions, said the Wilsonians, is becoming unbearable and potentially risks the extermination of the human race. The modern anti-war movement dates back to the 1820s and 1830s, when evangelical Christian groups summoned a series of peace congress to look for a way and the means to end the scourge of war. As improved methods of communications combined with a growing destructive power in arms, brought the shocking spectacle of modern war and all its horrors closer to civilian readers, the anti-war movement gained strength and quickly moving in three contemporary directions. The Peace Congress movement has continued under different institutional forms through the present day, convening international gatherings of activists to develop proposals for a peaceful world and seeking through students' exchange and institutional ties across national boundaries to build a network of activists and organizations in many countries determined to stop war. The second branch of the movement sought to reduce the horrors of warfare by imposing codes of conduct on it, and by limiting the production and distribution of use of arms. This program led to the formation of the International Red Cross and the Geneva Convention, and ultimately to such measures as contemporary treaties to ban landmines, to prevent the enlistment of children younger than 16 in military forces, and to establish international criminal court. The third branch of the modern peace movement seeks to prevent war by developing alternatives to it, forums in which nations can take disputes instead of fighting it out in international organization for collective security. This third approach led to the development of the first bilateral arbitration treaties and later to the League of Nations, the World Court, and the United Nations. The original leadership in these peace movements were European, but American Wilsonians participated early on and sought often successfully to get the U.S. government support for these ventures. After a national grassroots campaign spearheaded by the Civil War heroine Clara Barron, President Chester A. Arthur brought the United States into the Red Cross system in 1881, and with the support Congress ratified the Geneva Convention in 1882. As the United States moved to the center of the world stage, Wilsonians sought and still seek to put the growing muscle of the United States behind the world peace movement where they can. Wilsonians want the United States to take the lead in the movement. When the United States lags, when it fails to sign the landmine treaty, or falls behind in its UN dues, Wilsonians take themselves the task of bringing the United States into compliance, what they can hope will develop into a genuine Wilsonian international order.